Hi everyone, this is Grace, and today I'll be walking you through how I made this candy canes set. So let's go. Can you tell that I do these in one take? Yes, my friends. All right. This is from my Candy Canes online cookie decorating class. It is 10 designs, all on the same candy cane shape. It is advanced beginner / intermediate. Why is that? Let me tell you. So we are rocking two consistencies today, a soft peak piping consistency and a thin flood. We're doing a lot of wet on wet. We are doing a couple of different applications of preventing craters. We're doing a lot of different kinds of line work. So really leaning into some more refinement here. Now, this first one is one of my favorites, if not, no, let's be real, it's my favorite from the set. So there's this technique taking over not Instagram, the cookie world. What am I saying? This wet on wet candy cane. I did not come up with this. I saw this at the end of Christmas season last year. So I'd already done all of my Christmas cookies and I was like, next year, y'all, I am doing this. If you have seen my gingerbread sweeties set, also a class, I do this technique on a bigger scale, much simpler scale on one candy cane on a cookie. This one, we're obviously taking it up a skill level. So we're doing more than one candy cane. And in the other one, it was a pink base with white dots, which if that's the case, like you don't have to add the red is what I'm trying to say. You can just do the white and it will just be a candy cane of whatever the base is. But in this case, obviously the base is green. I want to take it up a skill level. So I added another color, beautiful people. So here's the key. Take your scribe, pull the edge of the dots. You want the very edge of the dots. You don't want to pull even like 0.5 millimeter into the dots because it's going to give the wrong look. I like to go around twice, but in this case, I'm doing just once because I got to move real quickly here, y'all. The icing has started to crust. You can actually see on the very edge, it's starting to wrinkle, which means that it has started to crust. What else can I say? The placement of the dots is key because there's like no messing with it after the fact. I kind of wish I had maybe done some of these in a different direction. I don't know. And that last one on the bottom feels a little squished, but here we are. I wanted to fill in the white space with some polka dots. I thought about doing the polka dots before I did the candy cane, like swirled the candy canes. But I don't know. My brain was like, ooh, maybe they'll get moved somehow by the movement of the scribe. I don't know. It made sense in my head. The only downside to doing the polka dots after is that obviously the base green has had even more time to crust. So by the time you add the polka dots, you might be having 3D polka dots. And in my opinion, that's fine. But if you really don't jive with that, something to consider. Okay. I don't know where my brain went just now. This next one, I believe, is my second application of this technique, if I'm remembering correctly. So for this set, obviously my colors are white, red, and green. I really wanted to do this set just with white and red largely because when I do a class, like I love the challenge of simplifying things as much as humanly possible, because just like the fewer colors, the fewer consistencies, blah, 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 that makes it, makes the prep faster, it just makes things easier and simpler. And as you know, if you've ever done this kind of hobby before, cookie decorating, it already takes long enough. And if you can just cut some corners anywhere, that's great. So I showed the sketches though to my mom in white and red. My mom is a painter, by the way. She's a professional oil painter. And she was like, Grace, it needs another color. It can't just be white and red. And I was like, but candy canes are white and red. So she was the one that convinced me to do green. I was like, I don't want to. And then I added green to my sketches and it really did just bring more complexity to it. So in the end, I'm glad I did the green because also that first cookie I think is exceptional with the green background. Love it. You can tell here that this was the last cookie I did of this design because the first and the fourth set of polka dots are not ideal, but we are rocking it because this was the last one I did. I actually filmed this class, this set at like between the hours of like 2 and 4 a.m. Not my finest moment, but I had already prepped all of the icing, all of the cookies, and I was just determined to finish it. I had done the Christmas trees class during the daylight hours. Anyway, so this is the same concept where you do polka dots and then you catch the edge of the polka dot. I just thought it would look cool in like a more traditional kind of candy cane stripe situation. I'm not really sure what else to say here. Obviously, I'm right-handed, so I'm going clockwise. Especially with those first candy canes, I do think that it would have been more accurate to the actual curve of a candy cane to have done it counterclockwise, but not being like, I think lefties will find counterclockwise easier. I find clockwise easier being right-handed. So there we go. That's the second of 10. Let's see if I can actually remember to count, but knowing me, probably not. Next up. So for the colors, I know which one's coming next. Okay. For the colors, white, red, and green. So the white I do actually color with a bit of food coloring. I just use AmeriColor or Chef Master white gel, just a little bit. My icing is already fairly white, but I like the pop. Okay. What else? Right. So the red is the Sugar Art red gel. If you've been around a minute, you know that I used to love the Master Leets. They're powdered. Their new gels are just as pigmented, but they are a gel, which is amazing. So I'm obsessed. It's just their pure red gel. And then the green, I can't remember right now. It's all in the workbook for the class. If I mixed it from scratch, I think I did. In any case, it is a green that has a bit more yellow to it. So just keep that in mind. You could take like a leaf green or maybe even an emerald, but you're going to need to add more yellow to it. That's just the green that I wanted for this set. I didn't want one that was on more of the blue end. Also, partly just because it like contrasted nicely with the Christmas trees set, which was more on the blue end, Christmas trees class. Anyway, let's get to this one. So we outlined, make sure you're outlining as far to the edge as you can, because you like, if you're looking from the top, you don't want to see any white peeking out from the left or right. On that kind of left side of the stick part of the candy cane, it looks like there's white peeking out, but there isn't. It's the angle of the camera. So yeah. All right, for this one, I did 6 sections. Yeah. I did kind of wonder if I should have done another section at the very end of the top, but here we are. So this is one of the ways we're preventing craters today. Also did not come up with this, taking the cookie world by storm from the Goodies Goddess on Instagram. The technique here is to poke holes into dried icing. I actually find that this works way better when the icing is more dry as opposed to less dry. You can even ice your cookies one day. At least I didn't do this, but the Goodies Goddess does this. You could ice your cookies Tuesday and then not do a second layer until Wednesday, which is like unheard of in cookie world, because the traditional way to prevent craters with a second layer is to do the second layer when the first layer has just barely crusted, and that's around like 30 minutes, maybe as much as 60 minutes, depending on your environment, etc. So the fact that you don't have to worry about how long the base flood has been sitting to do this second layer is just like so amazing. And I wish that I knew this technique earlier. So yeah, I love this so much. You really do want to actually puncture the icing. Be careful using too large of a scribe, because then you might like make too big of a hole. And then the other key here is to make sure you're using that scribe and pulling that into all of the corners. Super key. You're kind of actually pulling the icing like on top of the corner, if that makes sense. You're not going to overflood. These sections are so tiny. Yeah, in hindsight, I kind of wish that I had pushed up that first section on the left side and then added a little doodad at the end, but it's still beautiful. Beautiful. What's next? Maybe this is the Mary one. This cookie cutter, let's talk about that. So this is from Brighton Cutters, and so whenever I do my classes, I always use a main cutter, which so far has always come from one of three places. Either Brighton Cutters, Sweet Designs Shop, or Ann Clark Cookie Cutters on Instagram. On Amazon. And when I was trying to find alternatives for this to provide in the workbook, I hated all of the other alternative candy canes. Like, this one is by far the best for a couple of reasons. One, it's just like the perfect amount of chubbiness, because you don't want a too thin candy cane because that's just going to make it, first of all, delicate. But then second of all, there's just not as much surface area to actually decorate. Let me pause that conversation for a second because I want to talk about this. It's going to go by quickly. This little Mary writing, we're freehanding this. You can practice this on a piece of paper, but I really just say a prayer, breathe, and go. Because the squiggly, it's supposed to look, fanciful, whimsical, artistic, all those things. And this is a play off of something I saw someone else do on Instagram. The squiggles, I made my own, which I made them into a Christmas tree. What do you call this? String of Christmas tree lights. Thank you, Grace. And added the only other color that I had, which was red. You could just do those as dots, but I kind of did them as pressure piped teardrops just to make them kind of look more like Christmas tree lights. So let's go back to the cookie cutter conversation. So this is the perfect amount of chubbiness. It's like the right length. It's not too long. The curve is a good amount of curve. There are other really cute chubby ones that are a bit more artistic and have, they're not an even thickness. They're chubbier in some spots and less chubby in others, which I love too. But when I do my classes in particular, I usually try to pick a pretty standard classic kind of shape, because I also know that people are going to be often just finding whatever they can at their local store instead of using the recommendations in the workbook, which is totally fine. So I just like to keep things classic and accessible. So that's where I landed. I was just very happy to find that Amanda already had a cutter like this. The Christmas tree, though, I actually designed with her. So that was a whole other thing. But this one I call classic wet on wet. It's not a classic wet on wet candy cane per se, but it is a classic wet on wet technique. So one of the things with this set is that we're using two different sizes of bags. They're the same size, small or whatever, from Borderlands Bakery, but one is a big flood, and then the second one is a smaller flood amount. So that's what this bread bag is here. We used a larger bag of white to flood the cookies, so you can cut a larger tip. And then this one has a smaller tip on it and a smaller amount of icing, which gives you a lot more control. That's how we can get such small lines. If you use the red that you use to flood the candy cane, the lines are going to be so much thicker. You're not going to be able to fit as many, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what I'm calling a classic wet on wet technique, which is you pipe lines and then you pull a scribe through it. And we're doing just a continuous pull here instead of cleaning it off after every pull. There's really no particular point. Also, it just takes more time when you have to clean it off. And we're kind of racing against the clock here because that was a lot of lines to pipe. And we want to make sure that we pull our scribe through as fast as possible to prevent any craters. Craters? What am I saying? Oh my God. To not have any, oh my God, wrinkles. Oh, excuse me. yawn time, apparently. All right, so this next one is the red lines. Oh my god, this one takes 4 living ever. First things first is obviously to, when I say obviously, I just mean like you can already see me doing it. So this is what I'm doing, right? I'm piping. I cannot find my brain right now. I am, oh my goodness gracious. Great balls of fire. My brain. I just drew out with an edible marker the lines. Okay, thank you. Then next up, we are going to outline the different sections with our white soft peak piping consistency. And then outlining all of the sections is helpful because what does it do? It helps, you'll see in a second when we get to actually flooding the sections, it's going to help keep the flooded sections in place. So make sure when you sketch out those lines, by the way, that you don't go all the way to the edge. Because if you don't get your outline all the way to the edge, then you're going to see marker peeking through and it's going to be a sad day. So this technique here, I think is still technically called wet on wet. It's not like the normal kind of wet on wet you see me do where I flood the entire base and then I put a design on top. This is just wet next to wet, which is going to have an end result that the entire thing is flat. Which is what we're going for, wet next to wet. If I had flooded all of the red first, for example, and then went in for the white, the red would have crusted enough that there would be separation in between the colors, which is not what I wanted. I wanted something, a seamless look. We are ultimately going to cover this with a bunch of red lines, hence the name, red lines. So what am I doing? We're using that small bag again for both the white and the red, I believe. That's just going to give you a lot more control. Unlike when I flood 2 sections next to each other for flooding in sections, that means that like the section next to it is dry. This time I'm doing an outline on the very edge and then flooding next to it. So you'll see when I get to the next one, you actually want that outline to be like on top of the very edge of the previous section. So you'll see if you can see me do this here. It's hard to see at this angle, but I'm laying this on top. Actually, you can see the outline kind of peeking through on the bottom. That's one way to do this. Another way is to flood up next, like do a flood pressure next to it, and then immediately pipe a line on top of the section to get the straightest line possible. Those are both 2 options. You can see that my lines are still not perfect by any means. I probably could have actually laid another line down on the ones that were not quite as good. But I knew that I would be covering these seams with piping anyway. So it's not a big deal if they're not perfect. I mean, it's not a big deal either way. Y'all know me. I'm team good enough. So this is definitely one of the designs where color bleed could be a major issue because you're putting red flood next to white flood. You're going to get the most color bleed against white, and especially with red, because red is one of those colors that requires a lot of food coloring. You want to make sure that you are allowing your colors to develop, which means that you give them time to darken in the bowl, anywhere from like an hour to 8 hours to overnight to 24 hours to 48 hours. When I'm doing black, I will start it 24 to 48 hours in advance because I want to give it as much time as possible to develop. That means you don't have to use as much food coloring. Don't have to use as much food coloring. Right. So with red, same deal. I did use the Sugar Art gels, which means you don't need to use as much food coloring. Totally fine, though, to use Americolor or Chef Master gels with red. You're just going to need a bit more. And if you're going to use those less saturated gels, I would give them even more time to develop. Again, like at least 24 hours before you use them. The number one rule of thumb I always have is if your color is exactly what you want in the bowl in terms of saturation and darkness, you have gone too far. So the easiest way to think about that is in terms of like black. If it is black, dark as night in the bowl, you've added too much food coloring because it's just going to keep getting darker, which means it is oversaturated at that point. If it is a very dark gray in the bowl, that's what you want because as you bag it, as you decorate, as it dries, it's going to keep getting darker over time. It's a bit of a say a prayer and trust the process moment, but I always say, it's better to have a very dark gray instead of black instead of an oversaturated black. Same thing with red. It's better to have like not quite a bright red than to have a red that has too much food coloring in it. The reason for that is that too much food coloring does a few things. Obviously, you'll get color bleed. It will also make the icing taste bitter and yucky, which if you use my recipe though, I use lemon juice in my recipe and I use a lot of it, which in my opinion masks like any excess bitterness from the food coloring. And then it will make the icing dry kind of crumbly, not correctly, especially if you're doing like black details as a second layer as writing or something like that. It's going to very easily crumble if it's packaged or whatnot. So just something to keep in mind. I'm trying to remember what this one is, and I don't have a clue. So let's see how quickly. Well, obviously, once I flood it, I'll know. Excuse me. Exactly what it is. So if you're using a true thin flood, you shouldn't have to use a scribe at all to settle the icing, and I didn't really need to. Oh, this is the wreath. Okay. So this is one of a few different ways to do a wet on wet wreath. In my beginner Christmas class, I did it with dots, and I just wanted to provide another technique for doing this. So you're doing pretty wide V's, but at the same time, you want to make sure that they are pretty well, like, what am I trying to say? Like close enough to the edge of the cookie so it's clear that there's two strands of this wreath going through, if that makes sense. And then you want to alternate in between the V's. Like so. And then take your scribe and pull through the center. That's it. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. And then you're going to add some little holly berries. I tend to alternate like group of 3, group of 2, group of 1, group of 2, group of 1, group of 3, whatever. You can do whatever your heart desires. You could also do these dots as a second layer. That's another option. But I like the idea of just like one fell swoop, wet on wet. I clearly go kind of heavy with my holly berries, but you don't have to do that many either. She's beautiful. All right, what's next? Oh, this is the red, white, and green. I really struggle with naming my cookies, especially for these one shape classes, because I don't know, like, it's not like I can just be like candy cane Santa. No, it's like 10 different candy canes. So how do I name the different candy canes? Anywho, the first thing I did was use that edible marker again. I like Food Doodler. I get them on Amazon. Don't go all the way to the edge with your lines again. And the X's are to mark out so I know where to put the red. Oh, so in terms of edible markers, a lot of people struggle because the edible marker will like stop working after a while. Sometimes it happens faster than others. That's because of the butter in the fat in the cookie. If you're using your edible marker directly on the cookie. It messes with the ink or something. I don't really know. But I find Food Doodler works pretty well. It's like has the longest life of the ones I've tried. It also has a nice stiff tip to it. I was going to say something else. I don't know. Anywho, so we are preventing craters in the more traditional way now, which is to use the squiggle technique. I don't know why I felt the need to clear my throat before saying that, but so what this is, obviously you can't do the poking hole technique for something like this because there's no base layer of icing to poke a hole through, and I don't think it would have the same effect if you poked a hole through the cookie itself. So yeah. The squiggle, so the craters happen naturally when royal icing dries. It kind of sinks in the middle. It happens in just about all icing, but when it's a whole size cookie, when it's a full size cookie, it's just less obvious because it's a larger surface area. But something small like this is going to be much more pronounced, and it'll look like a dip in the icing. If you're getting an actual hole in the icing, that is more likely an air bubble that was present when the icing was wet and it popped as it was drying. So just the fun fact there. So the squiggles, keys to the squiggles. You want to do them like this is a tight squiggle close to the surface of the cookie. Basically, I mean, you're touching it as you're piping. I do really tight squiggles. Some people do like looser squiggles, whatever. Don't go all the way to the edge because you want to give it a nice like domed effect with the icing, if that makes sense. And then I don't let my squiggles dry. I flood immediately. I don't know if other people let them dry, but in my brain, it just makes sense. Because the whole point is you're providing more structure with the icing. And I feel like if you flood while the squiggle is still wet, it's like the flood becomes one with the squiggle and vice versa, if that makes sense. I don't know. It makes sense in my brain, y'all. Okay, we let that crust over at least 15, 20 minutes, probably more like 30 minutes, because we're just doing a little flooding in sections here so we get definition in between the red and the white. Yeah, we're doing the same squiggle thing. I believe this is the smaller bag of icing again, just so we have more control over flooding these relatively small sections. And the key, again, to getting the most seamless, beautiful look with these sections is to use your scribe. To pull the icing into those corners. So this is what I meant by flooding up next to the section. So I'm doing a flood thickness and pressure instead of an outline. This is my preferred way to do it with flooding in sections. I'm just mesmerized by my own cookie. Sometimes that happens, y'all, okay? So using that scribe, working quickly. If you're a more beginner cookier, I'd recommend doing one section at a time, but I live on the edge and I'm very impatient sometimes. So that's why I did 2 and then 3. And then I'm going right in with this green detail because that white has already been drying enough. And you don't have to add this green. I just thought it was a nice touch. You could totally leave it out though. But this is a soft peak piping consistency. And then we're going to take, which you saw me do in an earlier cookie, take that scribe and chop off the very edges. This to me gives it the most perfect waterfall effect off the edge. Love that. And there we go. All right, this next one, this might even be the last one, but I honestly, can I remember which one this is? Oh no, there are 2 more left. So what's this one? Which one is it, Grace? Wow, I'm having a total brain fart. I guess we're both about to find out. This is the downside of doing the one shape sets, is that I sometimes don't know what's coming next. Oh, this is the plaid. Oh my God. Okay, duh. All right. So I love me some plaid for winter cozy vibes. So again, we're using the small bag of red here. And the key with plaid is a couple of things, in my opinion. First of all, you need to make sure that the lines are, like, the sections of lines are quite tight together. So these pairs of lines are pretty tight together, but then there's a good amount of space in between them, because like the white space is really important in plaid. Or is it the negative space or the white space? Whatever. I'm not a real artist in that department. And then make sure that your crisscross lines are at a 90-degree angle. Then, I really like 2-layer plaid right now. So I like the addition of the green. You could also do the green as wet on wet. I think with this set, I did not have a small bag of green for the flood consistency. Excuse me. There you can see I think my line broke as I was piping that. Okay, for some reason I left out chopping off the ends of those lines, but I like the two what's the word? The 2-layer plaid. So last but certainly not least is what I'm calling the green stripes. This is just a terrible name for this cookie. I'm not gonna lie, this is probably everyone's least favorite of the set, but I kept it in because it is it's a different application of some piping practice, or like piping technique design, which just adds more practice, which I think is good for everyone. I find this sledding so soothing. Like, I could go for a nap right now. If anyone has already fallen asleep, love that for you. All right. So, unlike the third cookie we did where we were outlining at the very edge, for this one you actually want to leave space around the edge of the green to give the right visual for this. So that's the first thing you're doing. And then the second thing is adding these lines in between, which is actually a bit harder than it looks, to do some really clean joining of the lines. If you want to get real particular, which we know I don't do, you could take a scribe and actually settle all of those junctions of the lines. But y'all, I cannot be bothered to do that. Either way is great. Either way is fine. Either way is beautiful. And that is the entire set, my friends. What a ride. As always, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I hope you learned a thing or two. I would encourage you to go try this class yourself. Even if you're a total beginner, I have total beginners take any of my classes because I provide the same amount of support no matter the skill level in terms of prep and all that. So yeah, this was a ride. Thanks for joining along, and I'll see you next time. Bye.